Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to ARCHIDEX Fast Forward webinar series. My name is Lillian, and I will be your moderator this evening. ARCHIDEX Fast Forward is a webinar series focused on the holistic perspective from the industry. Each session brings together collaboration from the industry with renowned architecture and building professionals, sharing their experiences from various perspectives. Today's webinar is themed The Future is Green, Post-COVID Eco-Friendly Architecture. As we continue to fight against this global pandemic, the architecture world has taken new steps to reduce the effects that has been felt by millions of people. Introducing changes with environment design guidelines and a prototype for a COVID-19 resilient building typology, this talk puts together two industry professionals to discuss the new changes for humankind in our built environment, concentrating towards building a more sustainable, resilient, and equitable architecture through urban design and development. We have two speakers today, Associate Professor Industry Architect Sali Adresakam and Architect Tan Zi Han. Before we continue, a quick request. We would like for you to do a short survey through the link which is now in the comment section to let us know how you think of our ARCHIDEX Fast Forward webinar series after this session. All right, ladies and gentlemen, let's dive straight into it. First, let me introduce the first speaker, Associate Professor Industry Architect Sali Adresakam. Architect Sali. Hi. Good evening.
Good evening.
A quick review. Architect Sali is an architecture futurist, sustainability proponent, and design activist. Currently, he leads the hybrid architectural design firm SA2, or Sali Adresakam Architecture Sanjaya Berhad. The firm has won international competitions and represented the country in several world-class exhibitions. He is also currently the past president on council in Malaysia Green Building Council, and he was the deputy president of Pertubuhan Architect Malaysia PAM from 2017 to 2019. Currently, he is a Green Building Index facilitator and was previously the accreditation panel for the GBI Green Rating tool. He holds 2 degrees in architecture, one from the University of Liverpool, UK, and the other from University of Science, Malaysia. He is the academic advisor to the Masters of Green Architecture in University Technology Mara, UITM, and he also teaches Architecture Studio for Master Program in University of Malaya, where he has been appointed Associate Professor Industry for the university. That was a mouthful, Architect Sali.
Well, thank you for such a kind introduction.
All right, the stage is yours. We'll pass this session over to you for you to share your insights with us.
All right, thank you so much. So, welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Today, I'm going to talk about the interrelation between architecture, urban planning, and zoonotic pandemics. I think there's been a lot of talk about how to solve COVID-19 situation with regards to the usage of proper architecture, proper design. But not much is known that there is an interrelation between architecture and development that we're doing with this pandemic. No need for introduction. Lillian has done a good introduction of myself. Yes, we are on the verge of climate change, and all our development is affecting our climate by reducing the levels of ocean in the world, and also by increasing the temperature and the levels of water around the world. Yeah, and our development as a human species has affected the planet in a large and irreversible way. And if we don't stop it, we are also heading for this climate meltdown and almost a climate disaster. And of course, you have heard of the priorities of sustainability, the 3 core thrusts of sustainability, which is the benefit to the economy, benefit to the community, and benefit to the environment, where you look at sustainability as a whole. And to tell you the truth, COVID did a wonderful job for the environment, because when humankind stopped activity, this is a picture of Malacca River As you can see, it was very clear since there was no effluent from the factories and human activity was zero. So sewerage was far less. And you could see nature taking up uh, its territory again. And this is seen worldwide. Yeah. And COVID has had this positive impact. But of course, people are more aware of its negative impact. Here is a mass grave in South America, just to show you that the extent of COVID death. Maybe we are very lucky here in Malaysia that our government has controlled the pandemic very well, but not so much in certain countries. Even America now is having such a huge time fighting not just the disease, but also people's control over how to fight the disease. Yeah, this is WHO coronavirus dashboard from just yesterday. Yeah, this information is as of 4:30 p.m. yesterday, and you can see the number of confirmed cases is 30 million, almost 31 million. And just yesterday, there were 272,000 new cases. And nearly global or worldwide, we have nearly 1 million deaths due to COVID. And that's huge. And if you can see the global situation slide that I'm showing you, there's 31 million, and you can see the graph almost every day. The spread of this virus is very consistent. Yeah, if you look from May, the end of May, the end of June, July 30th, August 31st, it's consistently spreading, and it's consistently. This is the numbers of new cases. So consistently, daily, there's 200 to 300,000 new cases consistently. So it does, although we don't feel it so much because here we have control, but around the world, it's still a huge threat. And if it's not controlled, it is even a larger threat because it is so fast spreading. This is just a simple diagram showing that, after 5 days, only 2.5 people get infected if you don't have social distancing. But after 30 days, you get 406 people infected, which is something that is very quadratic in equation. Yeah, it increased phenomenally, and because of this, we have a huge monetary impact or economic impact. Yeah? They are, because of the pandemic, economies are growing to a halt almost. And you look at even here in Malaysia, we are looking at a negative 5% growth, which means that we are going into a recession if not controlled by the government. And all around the world, if you look at the United States and even Russia, they are going like 15%, and even some countries even worse. Yeah. So economically, it is not looking good. When you look at the world stocks versus the COVID-19 confirmed cases, you look at this graph, it's very clear that the stocks correlate well with the rise in number of cases. And you can see that this is world stocks, mean the combined value of the world's stocks, and trillions of dollars are lost because of this pandemic. We might think that this is something that has got nothing to do with development, but directly it has, because what has brought this over to humanity is our own expansion into virgin jungles and new forest areas. Because a lot of times our development, we are growing so fast as the human race. We are coming into areas where animals, it's their territory, and zoonotic diseases are easier to come or just jump from one species to another. And that's what zoonotic diseases are. And of course, you have heard about the wet markets everywhere around the world and the bush markets. Even here in Malaysia, there are markets which sell exotic meat such as this. Yeah, I mean, like you can see these monitor lizards and possums or some sort of rat. Yeah, and there's a wild pig there, and of course the infamous bats, which actually is a carrier for a lot of our zoonotic diseases. And when you look at the emerging zoonosis, and you might not know that it's not just COVID-19, yeah. Almost all the pandemics that we have before, uh, even Ebola, Nipah virus, SARS, MERS, H1N1, are all from animal hosts. Yeah, and most of them are from bats. This is because the genetic profile of humans and mammals are very much the same. So if the virus has adapted, it's just a few more genes to jump to a human. So that is why you see there is a lot of mammals. You don't see, say, for example, a virus jumping from a snake to a human, or something which is far different in genetic makeup from us. But it's more likely that a primate, such as a monkey, or a bat, which is a mammal, which is very close to us, these viruses would easily jump from these hosts, or these vectors, as they call it. And why? As I mentioned, the world's forest is getting smaller and smaller. This is Google data. If you don't know, Google runs a live database of through Google Maps and Google Earth of the world's forest, and this is you can freely see it online. This is just the raw data. Basically, it's like this. You can see that the configuration of the world's forest is very much declining. Especially towards the equator. If you can look at South America, it used to be all forest, and now it's far reduced. Perhaps closer to home, you can look at this map of Sabah and Sarawak and Borneo. 1950, everything was forested. It's a virgin jungle. 1985, there's a lot of development in the coastal areas. 2000, you can see the amount of deterioration in the forest. Yeah, and most of the times these areas are used for farming. People resettle in them, increasing the risk of transmission of these zoonotic viruses. And you look at 2020, almost half or less than half the forest is left. Yeah. And zoonotic diseases, once it's left unchecked, is very easy to spread among people. As I mentioned before, the vectors for this disease can be SARS, can be MERS, can be COVID. It all comes from these animals in the jungle that may mingle with livestock, yeah, and then cause massive spread of disease. And this is just some of the world's worst outbreaks. If you can see, Uganda, the Ebola, yeah, the Nipah virus. Country of origin is Malaysia, and but you look at the death toll, it's only 265 deaths. SARS with 74 deaths, H5N1 455, the bird flu 600 deaths, H1N1, which was a big thing, 200,000 deaths. But this was COVID at this time. It was 2,000 plus deaths. But I showed you the slide just now. Yesterday, as of yesterday, we had nearly 1 million deaths because of COVID. So by far, it's one of the worst, or if not the worst pandemic that humankind has ever achieved. And it's no surprise because so far we have, as I mentioned, we have ventured into the deepest areas of the forest. Last time it was somewhere that you could not access, but now it's part of a roadway or part of a small town or part of a farm. So the transfer from these animals to the human being is very very easy, because once you have large populations of humans near large populations or populations of animals, it becomes very very easy to transmit this disease, because there's a multitude of us. There's like 7 million plus humans, and once one person gets infected, especially with the worst thing is that the disease doesn't kill instantly like COVID, which makes it very contagious, because the person actually has many opportunities to meet other people and spread the disease. And we can't stop deforestation, of course. There's lots of pressure for us to develop forests for livestock, large scale agriculture. And you can see the primary cause here for forest lost in the Amazon is livestock, yeah, and it's agriculture um, and infrastructure. And if you look at Borneo, it's the you can see that large scale agriculture is a big contributor. So our data shows that, human activity, we can't stop it. There's no way of stopping this, but can we minimize it? And that's the thing that I'm trying to say, because through us being planners, being architects, being designers, being people who can effect development, can actually tone down all this to make can it be manageable. Yeah. Urbanization is one other thing that has skyrocketed in the past 50 years. This is from 1960. If you look at the yellow or the white, and the dark blue is the countries which have people only living in cities. If you look at Malaysia, we only have like 20 to 30% of people living in cities. But if you jump to this 1987, you can see that most countries in the world have already adopted urbanization as a de facto. Yeah, and this is you can go to this website. Very easy to get this data from a website called Our World in Data. And if you look at 2017, almost all countries in the world is blue or dark blue, because everybody is living in an urbanized or in a city. So what that translates to with regard to deforestation and is the opening of new townships in areas previously only it was an animal habitat, or it was a remote area in the jungle. And in our own country, we have new townships everywhere that previously was nothing was there. And these are the sort of like very dangerous points where zoonotic diseases can easily jump from animals to humans. And of course, this huge deforestation and huge urbanization also affects the temperature change for our planet. And of course, everything is getting hotter. Land use for the earth, we have 29% of the land on the earth's surface, and 71% is ocean. Out of that land area, we have 71% which is habitable land. Out of that 71%, 50% is agriculture, and that just leaves only 37% as forest. And this number is growing smaller and smaller. If you look at that land, our usage of habitable land, agriculture is a real culprit here. And you know that your food sometimes is not sustainable because it comes from a huge grazing area where, especially meat, like cows, cattle, which needs a large area and which actually has a large carbon footprint. And this actually does, in fact, not just damages our environment, but also new grazing ground, a new agricultural land cuts deep into already virgin forested areas. Yeah. And this is a graph to show zoonotic virus species richness, and mammalian species richness. Richness means the number of um, mammalian species. This is from a study, uh, global shifts in mammalian population trends. Yeah, and you can see that rodents and bats are one of the prime vectors, and this is very worrying because bats we can easily see, but rodents can easily spread pandemics and these zoonotic viruses in our cities. Why? Because as you can see from this global abundance in millions means that these circles actually show the population of these animals. Yeah, and unfortunately, we are one of the most uh, numerous animals around the world. There's a 7 billion population of humans. Once it gets into our population, a virus gets into our population, it's a very difficult to control if it's very contagious. And there's a lot of studies done with regard to these zoonotic diseases, and there's but still key hosts like bats are understudied. Urbanization is most studied. Effects of agriculture intensified beyond livestock is understudied. Needs to study, and there is ongoing studies for all these items that I mentioned. Yeah, we we think that humans are at top of the food chain, but actually a simple virus can actually, if given the right conditions, can and possibly will, if it goes unchecked, wipe out a huge chunk of the human population. And it's not a surprise because when we look at the urban population, the density is crazy, and it's very difficult to control viruses when your population is very dense. Yeah. So when you think about it, how do you actually control this spread of or the risk of future pandemics, given that you're coming from an architectural or planning or town planning view? One is to reduce population. It's a very unpopular thing to say, but reducing population is the best way to retain the environment of our planet, and to make sure that everything is stable, and to reduce deforestation. If you look at this graph from the United Nations in 2019, they have predicted that if we go on as usual by 2100, we have 10 billion people on this planet. So if we reduce that, we reduce having children. Yeah, we could reduce the population to a more manageable 6 billion, yeah, which is almost the population a few years ago. And this is, I think, is ongoing. A lot of countries are seeing reduction in population. Countries like Japan, many developed countries are looking at reduction in population, but still the countries like China and India are still growing very fast. The other things that we can use is the reuse of brown sites. Instead of going into forests, actively use urban sites. Make sure that they are efficiently used and not wasted. Other solutions include increased density. This is a picture of KLCC, as everyone know. Once you have more density, you can have more green areas, more areas that are saved actually. So actually density in a way is a friend to greens. And many people have found that to be true, especially when you look at the savings that you can do from in terms of transportation, in terms of lower carbon footprint, because you live very near where you work and all that. And of course, increasing the efficiency through design of buildings. That means multiple uses of the building, very efficient use of space, so that you don't need sprawling urban sprawl to have whatever function that you need. And of course, vertical greens and whatnot. So because our global floor area is increasing, and we are at 2020, which we have reached around 2.5 trillion square feet of floor area. So if we are not careful, we'll by the next 50 years, we will almost double that amount of building. Yeah, but if we reduce our population, as I mentioned just now, we don't need as much building. And of course, by generally taking care of the world, we will reduce our risk, basically. So by taking care of Mother Earth, we are actually taking care of the human race. So that's my point. And why this is very important is that it's not sometimes it's not a matter of technology, it's a matter of mindset. The mindset of humans is that we always think that we the planet Earth needs us, but actually it's us that needs the planet Earth. So I hope this small short talk can change your mindset towards looking at development and looking at how we are just a small puzzle in the big picture. And although you think that viruses come out of the blue, but actually we are to be blamed because we infringe upon territories that we shouldn't be going into, and shouldn't be multiplying so much that we facilitate these viruses to go into our population. Perhaps it's nature's way of controlling our population. With that notion, I would pass back to our moderator.
Thank you so much, Architect Sally. That was really an insightful sharing on interrelations between architecture, urban planning, and zoonotic pandemics. Looks like we really need to change our mindset and look after our Mother Earth, right?
Right.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, very much. Okay, let's go on to our next speaker. Our next speaker is Architect Tan Zehan. Architect Tan, hi, good evening.
Hi, evening.
Let me just give a brief about who Architect Tan is. He is an award-winning architect, sustainability and development professional. Based in Singapore, he has worked on multiple green projects, including the Park Royal Collection and BCA Skylab, projects which push the boundary of sustainability. He is also the chairman of sustainability at the Singapore Institute of Architects and board member of the Singapore Green Building Council. Architect Tan, over to you for your sharing.
Yeah, thank you so much, Lillian. So good evening. Thank you also, Architect Sally, for introducing the ideas of what we can do as architects and planners in order to curb the possible spread of zoonotic diseases. I think the organizers probably had this in mind, and because my talk will actually share a little bit on, from a building design perspective, right? Us being architects, our rice bowl really is to design environments that are healthy and also environments that are pleasing for our clients, not to mention fulfilling all the other requirements that a building is meant to do, right? So how do we do that in the least possible, in the least harmful way possible for the environment? So the work that I've done with the Singapore Institute of Architects under the Sustainability Committee is to basically look at how the practice of architecture can actually evolve to become more sustainable and therefore to adapt to new challenges as well, including that of the global pandemic, right? So the 7 icons that you see here, the 8th, of course, is SIA, embracing the UN SDGs, which also happens to be Sarli's last slide, right? Have we adapted these SDGs into these 7 environmental design goals, these EDGs? Yeah. So I'll start off with this. What on earth is happening? So in 2019, we were just getting aware of the global waste problem, right? And then we ended off the year with massive fires both in Amazon and also Australia. And we also ended off the year with COP25 that was meant to happen in Chile. But maybe as a sign of things to come, it was actually moved to Madrid as a result of social unrest in Chile, right? So it's not only environmental issues, it's also a lot of social disparity issues that the world has had to face. And of course, in 2020, we started off the year with a bang, and not in a good bang, because in this case, the explosion really of the coronavirus pandemic. And of course, 2020 will also see a global decision, in this case, the US elections, which could actually determine how the planet proceeds with regard to how it addresses climate change. US, of course, being a large global stakeholder in these issues, right? So COP26 was meant to be in Glasgow, I think has now been postponed, right? So what does that mean for the world when it comes to basically the climate and the biodiversity loss crisis, right? So this has already partly been addressed by Sarli, right? So COVID-19 and climate change, not too different in terms of A, how we deal with the problem, and B, how we perceive the problem. Because first, we deny the problem, we think it's someone else's problem, we try to blame it on someone else, and then we basically go, hey, the solution is too expensive, let's wait for someone to come up with the vaccine. And when I say we, I mean the majority of the global population. And that is because so many of us think that, hey, you know, this is a global issue. It is not something that I personally can change, right? And I hope at the end of this talk, both by Sarli and myself, we can actually hopefully change a little bit of that mindset, because the change can happen within us, within ourselves. So you've heard about flattening the climate change curve. You've heard about flattening the COVID curve as well, right? So they're not too different, to be honest. What we need to do is basically to set certain goals and to maintain certain actions. In this case, for example, keeping social distance, wearing our mask, to ensure that the spread, in this case of COVID, is basically controlled. And likewise, you know, the impact of climate change. Here's a concept, the Earth Overshoot Day. So the Earth Overshoot Day is the day in the calendar year starting from January 1st, in which the Earth's resources are already fully utilized, right? So if you look at recent trends, even with COVID-19, right, in 2020, we've only managed to reduce the Earth Overshoot Day, which in this year happens, I think it was August 22nd, right? We've only managed to reduce it by about 3 weeks. So it takes a giant pandemic only to reduce the amount of resources we use in a year by 3 weeks. And again, these are the countries and which part of the year they've sort of fully utilized the Earth's resources. So it's not looking too good, guys. I think over the past 50 years or so, we have really let it slide. So there are a few things to look at, one of which is the planetary boundaries model, which not only looks at climate change, but also 9 other different sectors. And across these 9 different sectors, you see zones of different colors. When it hits a zone of red, it simply means that we're now in a zone of uncertainty. And when we're in a zone of uncertainty, the planet basically, you know, is more than able to hit the reset button. And the last time that happened, basically we lost our entire dinosaur population, right? So the Earth can reset itself. The Earth can in fact survive. It is just life as we know it on this Earth that will not survive. So if you look at this, basically we are doing more harm to the biosphere as well as to the planet through phosphorus, nitrogen, and other kinds of chemicals than simply carbon, right? So climate change, of course, is major, but we are looking at global disaster when it comes to biodiversity loss and also what we're doing to our natural landscaping, right? And that part 2 of that was already addressed by Sarli's talk, because part 2 of that results in all sorts of zoonotic diseases potentially. So looking in this case at the donut economy model, so again, taking those sectors, putting in a small circle in between, and that is the social foundation circle, right? So that's the inner circle. And the outer concentric circle is the ecological ceiling, beyond which we've basically extended or expanded the use of resources in the environment, right? So what lies in between really is the comfortable, safe, and just, right, or the equitable zone in which humanity can actually thrive. So if we look at global economics as cycles within this green band, as opposed to just year on year a continuous growth, that could be a way of actually addressing what we're actually doing to nature. You've seen all this logos, I'm pretty sure. What we've tried to do at the Singapore Institute of Architects is basically combine those that we can and do have autonomy and a bit of jurisdiction and control over, and basically come up with environmental design goals, right? So there are goals that architects can actually achieve in tandem with the United Nations SDGs. So let's go through these. The first of which is education and integration, right? So I've learned a bit I've learned quite a lot, I would say, from Architect Ali's talk earlier. And I'd say the architect, given the breadth of our training and also the wealth of experience that we have in designing environments, we do have a role in integrating and educating the client and our team, and how basically we can design more sustainably, right? So education that is both formal and informal, that can then be measured by basically tools for measurement, right? It could be BIM, it could be a virtual design and construction, it could be all sorts of things. And the metrics then would be, how do you measure the extent in which the education and the integration of different professions has actually happened, right? One of those could actually be in the level of detail and the level of overlapping and integration or BIM model. So that integrates SDG number 4, quality education and partnerships for the goals, and is applicable in the design stage all the way till the construction stage. An example is basically the SIA Green Book. So that's the new publication by the Singapore Institute of Architects. And that captures the 7 EDGs, and it also shows examples of how buildings can therefore be designed equitably. Another example is a project that I worked on with Savannah Jurong back then, and basically this is a rotating test lab that has about 200 sensors on it. So the sensors could measure carbon output, they'll measure light, and measure heat and all sorts of things, and basically adapt the internal environment accordingly. So what this lab does is you could replace the facades, you could replace the air conditioning systems, and whenever a new technology comes in, you can basically adapt it as you will in the lab, and the study or the outcome results from the lab can then be taken to market, right, for market adoption. Second EDG is climate action. So this is, of course, a broad category, right? So architects, being the custodians of the built environment, should actually lead the charge, right, of how basically building and development could influence positive climate action or mitigate the effects, in this case, of climate change. So the metrics in this case could be low operational carbon when it comes to the building cycle, the building life cycle, right? Effective life cycle assessment, and also determining what the metrics of low pollution actually will be. So it could be the ozone depletion potential, the global warming potential, NOx, SOx, and other kinds of readings. Right? And these then will be the measurables. So the idea, now that you've seen the metrics and measurables in this case as an example, would be to tie these back to either tools that are already out there in the market that can in fact measure some of these metrics, and map this against, in our case, Green Mark. In regional case, it could be GBI, it could be LEED, it could be all sorts of green rating tools as well, right? But in this case, the architect would take the driver's seat, right, as opposed to the sustainability consultant or the engineer. So this again is applicable to, in this case, design, construction, and the life cycle maintenance of the building as well. So examples would be, in this case, a smart city master plan, where we basically set out environmental performance metrics at the beginning of the master plan. So whoever comes in and then designs on these different lots of land would then be subject to these framework guidelines accordingly. And just like every master plan, of course, you'd be able to deal well with the geometries in light of good passive design as well as renewables. So EDG number 3 would be natural capital. So how do we address the ecological impacts of our built environments? So we basically look at measurables such as biocapacity, how much green is being replaced onto the existing natural land that we've basically taken out. Of course, this applies less to brownfield projects, which would be existing already, right? But still, we need to understand the extent of the ecological footprint of both the building itself as well as the nature of production, and with it all its embedded carbon. In the case of an example, in this case of Park Royal on Pickering project with WOHA, where basically the green land that was actually built upon was literally replaced through sky gardens, through vertical greens, and so on. But not just that, this also brings in principles of biophilia, where the sense of wellness and recovery as you're looking out into natural greens does affect your psychological and to some extent physiological wellness. The next EDG is basically resource management, where we, I think as architects, need to be mindful of the materials that we're actually using, right? These materials, when they're mined, if they're natural material, or when they're manufactured, if they're artificial material, of course, carry with it their own embedded carbon as well, right? Not to mention the loss of biodiversity as you take away existing habitats for animals and so on. So we do have a choice in deciding and also design what kinds of materials go into our environments, right? So the metrics could be percentage replacement of material, in this case, energy utilization index, right? Water efficiencies, as well as looking at, in this case, certified renewed forest sort of timber, if you're using timber at all, and also well or rather robustly certified materials that our green rating tools actually do contribute to as well, right? So the measurables would be energy, water, and materials. These do cover quite a big spectrum of the SDGs because we're looking at, first of all, clean water and sanitation. We try not to pollute in the manufacturing process. We look at renewable energy, responsible consumption, and therefore protecting SDGs 14 and 15, life below water and life on land. And again, proper resource management, just as you manage your manpower, you too would manage materials, and therefore it will be applicable across the life cycle of the building. An example is a project by MiniWiz. This is actually a museum in Taiwan. It was made out of 1.5 million recycled PET water bottles that have been refashioned to become clickable and interlocking building facade elements. So these elements being recycled plastics, they can actually be translucent. And so it becomes a light media display, and they become interactive displays as well, in this case for a museum. EDG number 5, coming towards the end now. Number 5 is more than halfway through. So we're looking at urban harmony as well, and looking at architecture or design as part of an entire master plan, in this case, where we interact and engage with existing communities, right? And also existing neighboring elements, right? So in some ways, this is actually Architecture 101, where we design best with urban connections and infrastructure, where we look at environmental effects of our design, right? How wind actually flows through, how it provides shade, or, in the worst case scenario, how it minimizes glare for our neighbors, right? How it reduces the urban heat island as well. So looking at geometries, massing and form, and also materials. And the measurables could also be, well, connectivity, placemaking, and over time creating a new heritage and community experience through architecture. Right, an example of this is a public housing project for HDB, the Housing Development Housing Development Board in Singapore, and this was a project undertaken with WOHA. So you see, as much as it is a fairly dense development, you would get areas of breathing space in between and the creation of connections, not just not just for physical connection, but for the creation of chance encounters as well between different residents in that giant pigeonhole that we all live in. And of course, the voids therefore allow for wind and so on, for natural ventilation to basically permeate through the development as well. And for health and well-being, so basically this is a bit more intangible, right? How do we design environments that basically encourage physiological wellness as well as psychological wellness, right? When you go into a building and you feel happy, what is the reason for that, right? What is the emotional satisfaction quotient that basically can be employed when you're designing a building? So the metrics could be, in terms of thermal comfort, the predictive mean vote, right? It could also be a percentage of people dissatisfied and so on. You could have well-accessible buildings that are friendly for both the able and the less able individuals. And the measurables then would be measurements of biophilia, comfort, inclusiveness, and safety, for example, right? So how do we then take this in a way that's actually quantifiable and practicable? So this basically looks at SDGs 6, 7, 10, and 11, right? Which looks at, again, reduced inequalities, meaning can architecture be the level playing field for society? I believe it can, right? And whether or not we can start encouraging or start engendering sustainable cities and communities through this guideline. An example would be a project proposal for a hospital in India, where through the concept of biophilia, understanding basically that through visual access, again, through the decks. Every single ward in the hospital does have access, if not visual, then physical access into a garden. And for end-of-life patients or for terminal illness patients, still giving them the amount of dignity that they deserve as human beings, and also introducing spa treatment areas and so on as part of the holistic healthcare experience. Right? So preserving not only life on the planet, but preserving life within the hospitals as well, through creating a good value and good quality of life for the patients. And finally, adaptability and longevity, right? So I think earlier what was spoken about was trying to maintain as much as possible a balance between architecture or the built environment and nature. So we are crucial in the whole experience of preserving heritage, of creating that very balance, right? So the metrics could be a UNESCO historic urban landscape, for instance, right? We could also design buildings to be modular and flexible and allowable for structural reuse. Right? So as far as possible, providing the the Swiss Army knife sort of approach for architecture. So the measurables could be adaptability, flexibility, conservation and heritage, and also designing such that buildings become maintainable in the long run. So depending on what kind of use you employ, it could also be maintained fairly conveniently. So that basically promotes good jobs and economic growth. Basically, if a building is adaptable, it can house multiple economies, for instance. Right? You also look at some innovation and digital infrastructure. It could be physical infrastructure as well, and ultimately responsible consumption. So SDGs 8, 9, and 12 are engendered within the EDG, the Environmental Design Guideline of Adaptability and Longevity. And I'll pause a little bit here because this becomes, I think, the tenet of how flexible design in the time of a global pandemic is, right? You've seen globally how different kinds of facilities have been adapted to become housing areas or quarantine areas for suspected COVID patients, and also how massive halls, massive exhibition halls, and massive facilities have become housing areas for COVID wards and so on as well. Yeah. So this, of course, is applicable to the design stage. When you design for flexibility, the structure and the core and shell actually allows for that, which then extends into, in this case, the operations of the building as well. So an example in this case is a building from the 1970s. So it's been given a new facade cladding, right? But the existing structure of 10 stories actually remains. So with Ong and Ong Architect, we basically took the existing 10-story structure and we kept the very robust structure because back then they had good safety factors for engineering, so they designed for it to last. And then we topped up 2 levels of new concrete structure and created, again, a brand new program for the building with a brand new skin. So in so doing, we turned an old industrial production house into a new sort of modern industrial building with integrated retail as well as integrated commercial office. So you could have basically your manufacturing production on your lower ground, and then on the mezzanine floors, you could have your your office space and your sales and your point of sales areas as well. So how do we conceive a project that basically adapts to all 7 of these environmental design goals? So we took COVID-19 again as an opportunity to study the perfect typology of a building, and this is what we hope to be the, I suppose, the nominal or the notional building in response to COVID-19. This was done with the Sustainability Committee. So what happens again, Sally has addressed it already. So again, you see the peripheries between nature and between man-made landscapes, and how these peripheries very easily get traversed, and therefore the interaction between, I think, humankind as well as nature gets blurred, and so too zoonotic diseases and so on, right? So I won't get into the stats too much. And if you look at the modern building, so we've designed modern refrigerators for ourselves, so we've avoided that altogether, right? But in the case of natural ventilation, so assuming that you have a certain amount of density to play with, you don't have to cram all your buildings together, can we then adopt the traditional Dewan or the public hall sort of a typology, where first of all you have in some ways layer protection, but you also have external ventilated corridors, right? Which could be useful in this case for COVID because you do not want to be held in an enclosed space with potential disease spread. So if you take that on, identify the right column spacing sizes, identify the right grid, right? You could actually create a certain level of flexibility within such a grid, and these grids would then create different building blocks, right? You could have your residential, it could be adapted into hospital wards if you have to, and of course, it could also contain various modes of commercial activity. And in terms of urban planning, basically plan these facilities equidistant around the city or the country, such that in the case of any emergency evacuation or in the case of any emergency response, they can be fairly accessible from anywhere within the city. So the prototype then would, of course, ideally be resistant towards seismic forces as well, towards earthquakes in this case, right? So the construction then would have a certain element of resilience towards changing landforms even. The elements of the natural ventilated hall would then carry through in this modern structure, and you could adapt and build on a new form towards it. So it could be expandable, but at the same time, it would also provide you a fairly large extent of accessible and usable roofs where you can plant, in this case, your own urban farms and so on. So the building becomes self-sufficient in case everyone starts wiping out the supermarkets as they did earlier on in the year, right? And again, accessible at lower levels to emergency healthcare services. And where it needs to be, it can also be adapted into, different hospital wards or holding facilities. Yeah. And all that, of course, would be aided with natural ventilation. Wherever needs to be mechanically ventilated or air conditioned, you would have sufficient exchange rates, or rather exchange flows of both the supply and the return air. So you get a constant supply of fresh air, for instance. So you can work at all these metrics that are defined by the 7 SDGs into a sample building like this, right? So buildings do, in fact, have quite a bit of pertinence in how I think we engage with the environment. And of course, sustainable buildings that are flexible and promote good indoor air quality, right, could in fact become key agents in the fight against COVID-19. Because while we are on any extended mode of lockdown, touch wood, if we ever hit a second or third phase, then we'll go back into our homes, and our homes become our main source of prevention and our main sort of a line of defense against the spread of the virus. So in closing, be sure to wash your hands. All will be well, right? That's one way. And be sure to wear a mask. It's one way against combating COVID-19. And then after that, we'll have more and more new waves to ride. And I say waves to ride because I think we do have the jurisdiction to make positive change through both our behavior and how we design our environments. So hopefully we can also ride this recession wave, the climate change wave downstream, the biodiversity collapse wave downstream as well. Yep. And I think with the best of faith and also the best of our efforts, not just within the architecture field, but in close collaboration, of course, with all our heroes in the healthcare fields. With that, thank you very much. And just about exceeded by 1 minute. But we hope to be able to address any questions. Yep. Terima kasih.
Thank you so much, Architect Tan, for sharing your experience and perspectives on the buildings in the age of COVID-19. Now let's bring back Architect Sali to discuss a bit about both presentations and probably answer some questions. Hi, welcome back, Architect Sali. Gentlemen, I have a quick question. In your experience, how do you think the COVID-19 pandemic has changed the way we live, and what are the measures, or should I say skills or knowledge, that an architect should equip with it to incorporate in their designs for future cities? What do you think, Architect Sali?
Well, I think the pandemic has done one great thing for the industry, which is modernize it in a way that sometimes people want to change. It's not about they don't have the technology, but there's no impetus for change. A good example is online meetings. Prior to the pandemic, there was no movement for online meetings. I think just by having this push, there needs to be a research done on how many tons of carbon we have saved just by not traveling to meeting places and reducing traffic and all that. And
True.
it's something that, you know, it sort of like pushes, and I think it's a natural thing that we tend to reassess everything that we design once we look at it from a different perspective. And I think this is one thing that forces us to relook at a lot of previous designs, how circulation are done, how separation are done, how security is done. There's I think that question deserves a forum of its own. Wouldn't you agree?
Absolutely, absolutely. What do you think, Architect Tan?
Yeah, I mean, again, I think it's not just an effort for architects alone. It is a collaborative effort with, in this case, policymakers, and we're ultimately servants to the communities in which we exist, and therefore the governments which also guide their existence, right? So I think having a proper engagement and having a proper communication with the powers that be is crucial. I say this in the context of Singapore, where again the nation and the country is small, and therefore maybe there are certain inherent efficiencies in that, right? But it will be across the spectrum. And while I shared a bit on the core and shell potential for what COVID-ready building would be, it's definitely not the end of it, because we need to discuss then with interior designers on what's the best way of having people navigate within the building while maintaining a good social distance, right? Could we experience again an auditorium or a cinema in the same way that we used to, even in these times and even beyond? How does our engagement with the spaces that we've become so intimate and familiar with, how does that change, right? So that again rewrites the architectural rulebook.
Yeah, it really does rewrites everybody's, not just the professional architects, but also the layman people like us. A lot of people are saying that we've brought forward 2030 to now 2020 in terms of the technology, in terms of meeting online, in terms of the webinars that we're having right now. In fact, in all those online platform that we're talking about here. So yeah, I think it's quite a big impact, I would say. Don't you guys think so?
Yeah,
I mean, trust me, I would rather prefer right now to actually be physically in ARCHIDEX and to experience KL Expo once again. And
Yeah.
but we make do, and hopefully we'll take baby steps towards that full recovery.
Yeah, I mean, I think we on our end we are actually happy that the show will still go in December. So well, hopefully by then the borders will be opened so that we can welcome our international guests as well. Nonetheless, of course, we will do things online together with you as well. So, yep. Okay, I have a quick question here. This is for Han. Okay. Climate change has been an issue for the longest time. I know you've also mentioned that good air quality is important, but as we move into building more sustainable future cities, this could become hard, by especially in compact and high density area. So what do you think that people should look at, be it in the designing of a new building or even when we refurbish an old one?
I think, first of all, it's important to keep the quality of air within interior environments clean, right? But that doesn't mean we expel everything that's out, that's dirty, out into the big streets, right? Because that, again, could be where the agents of disease of any form of airborne diseases especially could actually reside. So the problem of the sick building syndrome has not actually gone away. In fact, it's become even more apparent because now homes, again, will become our first line of defense, right, against any pathogens. So the idea is to design systems, or, well, first of all, if you can design for naturally ventilated systems, if you have access to fresh air, which is going to be a luxury these days. But if artificial or rather mechanical ventilation needs to be designed in, what we'll then need to do is to ensure sufficient refresh rates of fresh air, number one, and number two, to constantly maintain our buildings, right, such that there's no buildup of algae and buildup of other contaminants that could lead to, I don't know, Legionnaire's disease, or that could lead to the growth and the spread of other kinds of pathogens. So yeah, the principles remain the same, but in fact, I think with what's been happening with the pandemic and so on, we do need to be a whole lot more careful about how we maintain our buildings.
Yeah.
True that. You're right.
Uh,
Architect Sali, do you have anything to top up on that?
I think may I present perhaps an alternative view, because I think uh, building designing buildings to actually adapt to pandemics is all good and well, but actually it's kind of just treating the symptom, whereas the bigger issue is the what has caused the pandemic. So I think we should really look at the global causes of pandemics, which is the deforestation and all these bigger issues. Because if we can react to issues like this by taking measures that actually just prolonging everything by solving the symptoms, but the actual root cause is not solved. Yeah, and that's why we keep having these cycles of pandemics, and it's getting worse and worse.
Yeah. I mean, it gets a little out of hand sometimes, and it gets a little scary sometimes. I mean, thank God we are all safe at this point of time, as in you and I are here on this platform and sharing our experiences. But true enough, there are still a lot of people out there who's probably suffering from the pandemic itself. And yeah, the take is quite heavy on a lot of people. But I guess we cannot just step out of it like Avengers, right? So, okay. Okay. Perhaps a question for Architect Sali.
Yeah.
Okay, it's a little long. So, as you've shared, there is definitely a correlation between urbanization and diseases, and this has become greater and more serious over the last decade. However, as lands continue to open with cities growing to accommodate migration and job creation, what do you think designers, architects, or even city planners need to look at in order to reduce the effects of deforestation, or even measures to take to incorporate into their designs for future cities?
I think, as I mentioned, most is the increase, the adoption of higher densities, because a lot of places around the world, the word density is seen to be counterproductive to green, but actually having more density in the right way can be very productive to having more green spaces and saving potential forests from being cut down. And I think more recent master plans, I think if you look at the new capital for Indonesia that they're planning,
Mm.
they're actually trying to plan the buildings in between forests, so
Mm.
that they keep the forest rather than cut them down and destroy these habitats and whatnot. And I think these kind of radical thinking should be implemented, so that we can keep this balance, because as I mentioned, the planet doesn't need us. I mean, like, if we die out, the planet will go on, but we need the planet to survive. So better start taking care of it.
It's more like how we can live together, or how we can make the earth like us more in that sense.
No, because I think last time there were far few less there are very few humans, so everything was in balance. But once we are out of balance, that is the problem. There's as you mentioned, there's no Thanos snap to cut
Correct.
down half the population, so we must make sure that there's enough resources to go around. And having a planet with limited resources is something that everybody needs to understand. Yeah.
True. Architect Tan, any take on this? Since we're talking about snapping out of it.
No, there's no silver bullet. There's no what's that? The glove thing with the stones?
Infinity
No.
Gauntlet.
That's right. Yeah. So we don't have the luxury of I think living in a comic book world, right? We do, however, have the autonomy of really making decisions that will make a difference, and those decisions lie in the way we consume. Those decisions lie in the way we treat disposables, in the way we treat fast fashion, in the way we consume our fast food, and in a way that we're ultimately polluting the planet, right? So these are the things that do not need architecture to influence. These are the things that basically just require good civic behavior, right? And civic behavior is no longer about being civil to your fellow human beings. It's really about being civil to the planet.
True, that's true. Okay. All right. I believe that's all the questions I have from the audience today. Any last words, gentlemen? Architect Sali?
Um,
Mindset.
no, I think
Mhm.
I hope I have tried to open up the general viewpoint about the things that are happening and our interrelationship, because I think a lot of people they are very they take a lot of things for granted, like running water, roof over their heads. There's a large percentage of the world that does not have proper sanitation, proper running water, and we still are not looking at the world as a global community. We are still very looking at our individual selves. So I think if the challenge for this next generation is to look at a global community, because in truth now something that's happening in the other side of the world does affect you tremendously, because there's so many of us.
True. And be kind to Mother Earth, right?
Definitely.
And Architect Tan, last words?
I think just be well, and this applies to myself too. Just be responsible. I think over your actions, whether it's an action of consumption, it's an action of purchase, it's an action of design. Ultimately, if indeed we're speaking to a group of architects, right? So I think every action has in the cosmic scheme of things an equal, if not an even more serious reaction. And I think we're really at a stage now where we can either turn the boat around or just continue sailing off the waterfall and plunging with it, right? So the other thing is really to keep in the best of health, right? I have no clue who attended this seminar. We don't have access to the participants, or at least I don't. But I think for all of you out there, keep in the best of health, keep in the best of mindset, keep in the most positive of thoughts, because only then can you actually make any sort of impact or make any sort of positive change, right? It's like with every caregiver, if you don't take care of yourself, you can't take care of anyone else. So take care of yourselves out there.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's great.
Nice to share the stage again with you, Zuhan, after so long.
All right.
Good to see you, Architect Sally.
Yeah. It sounds like a reunion for the two of you as we were preparing for this, right? Okay, I guess that's about all the time we have for this evening. Thank you so much, Architect Sali and Architect Tan, for your time for this. It's been really an honor to have you on this session with us. I've learned so much. Thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your attention and time with us this evening as well. We would like you to do a quick survey through the link which is going to be come out in the comment section right now, to let us know how you think of ARCHIDEX Fast Forward webinar series. Till we meet again, thank you so much. Stay safe and stay safe. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.